on to plumbing up then. And when I set the rig up, I mentioned it was important to get a rough idea how deep the venue that you're fishing is. You can do that in a number of ways. Speak to the locals, look on any venue information, any signs or maps or anything on the website. Often depths are listed in places like this, or just talk to other anglers on the bank. But it's always a good idea, if you can, to get a rough idea how deep it is and set your rig at that before you plumb up. If you can't do that, can't find that information, don't worry, you can still find out. It'll just take you a little bit longer, as I'm about to explain. I mentioned earlier that I'd set the float up to be plumbed almost perfect. I wasn't too specific about that for obvious reasons, because when I plumb up, I do want the float to be a little bit more buoyant than normal. So the first thing I'm going to do is just check where the float cocks to with the shot I've added already. You'll notice as the float lands in the water, there's quite a lot of the stem showing, and then you'll just see that stem started to be taken down in the water as that final bulk kicks in. So I now know the depth of that lake is greater than where the bulk is on the rig. So it's more than about 4 foot in this instance, because that bulk is off the bottom. I also know that when all those shot are applied to that float, is about 1 inch of the bristle showing. So that tells me if there's any less than that, when I add the plummet, the depth of the lake is greater than the length of the rig. So now I can tighten that clutch up from setting the rod up, reel in, and add the plummet. Attach the plummet simply by threading the hook through the top loop of the plummet and then into the neoprene at the bottom there. And I always like to start the plumbing up process off the rod end. Sounds close, but it just gives you a rough idea what you're working with in terms of shelves. And I can see there, as I drop that plummet all the way down to the bottom, there's about probably 18 inches of line remaining above the float. So I know there it's approximately 3.5 to 4 feet deep. I'm then going to just work my way out and just try and build in my head a gradual picture of the depth of the lake. So maybe 1.5 rods out, I can still see there that is well cocked. I'm going to venture a little bit further out now. And again, all I'm trying to find now is a very rough idea of the contours of the bottom. So now maybe 2 rod lengths out. It's important to say, when you're plumbing up in this way, leave your bail arm off so that your float's got potential to rise straight up as it is doing now, you'll see. Now that's interesting, because you can now see that that float's risen to the surface, but it has taken a little bit of that body down from that original standing position. So I actually know in this instance, I'm around about where I want to be fishing. It's probably, that rig is probably around about 1 inch over depth, something like that. Okay, so we're relatively happy at that. If I wanted to add depth to it, all I'd do is simply slide the locking shot up the line, or if you want to, you can take the locking shot off, move the float up, then replace it, but I'm happy on this float fish line just to slide it up, or slide it down accordingly. If there's loads of float sticking out of the water and you know the venue's loads shallower than your rig, you can do it that way. But it's just about tinkering around with that until you know you're fishing. I'd like to say anything between 1 and 4 inches on the bottom this stage in the day is great, because we can tinker around with the depth once we get fishing. But all we want to know right now is that we're fishing on the bottom, and we can play around with that later. I'm now happy that up to about 2 rod lengths out we are. I'm just going to go a shade further and find out. I don't intend on casting miles today because there's no need. If I did want to do that, if I did want to cast a little bit further, it's about 3 rod lengths out now. If I did want to cast a little bit further, you can always replumb the depth as you go. But there really is no point in making life difficult for yourself by fishing too far out. So again, 3 rod lengths out, that bail arm's off, I'm watching that float, it's very similar. It's nice and flat there. I'm fishing 1 inch to 2 inches on the bottom, and I'm happy at that to get fishing and see what we catch. So now it's time to get some bait in and get fishing.